Good evening, Gamecocks, and welcome back to Gamecock Gameday.
Stay tuned to hear our thoughts on some tough Gamecocks losses, our Around the Horseshoe segment of the week, and what you can look forward to in Gamecock basketball.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Gamecock Gameday.
Thanks for sticking with us, Gamecocks. I'm Zander Collins.
And I'm Austin McConnell. Gamecock men's basketball continued their unfortunate losing streak this past week with a pair of losses against number 3 Florida and LSU.
The Gamecocks started out hopeful on Saturday, going back and forth with the Gators in the first half. South Carolina seemed to be in a decent position, down by just 4 points going into the second, but then they quickly lost control as the Gators went on a 12-1 run to open up the second half. The Gamecocks were never able to recover, adding a 67-88 loss to their streak.
The Gamecocks then headed over to LSU last night to take on the Tigers. LSU wasted no time building a 14-point lead 20 minutes into the game. This time, however, the Gamecocks were able to rally, cutting the lead to 9 points with a 3 by Artemis. Unfortunately, the Gamecocks, the comeback campaign was short-lived, and an 8-0 run by the Tigers sealed their 13th conference loss of the season. Despite the losses, more Gamecocks have been stepping up to assist Gamecock standout Colin Murray-Boyles.
Senior guard Jacoby Wright led the team in scoring against the Gators with 13 points and tied for the team high with 4 rebounds. Also against the Gators, Nick Pringle shot a perfect 6 for 6 at the charity stripe and finished right behind Wright with a total of 12 points. At LSU, transfer Jamari Thomas took the game high 23 points, going 9 for 16 from the floor.
Yeah, it was looking like it was going to be really exciting against Florida. That first half had me on the edge of my seat, going back and forth. The second half just got away from us just a little bit. Also got away from us last night, but go ahead and talk about Florida first, Zander.
Yeah, obviously we played them very closely in that first matchup. Wasn't the case necessarily in the second half of this one. Mm-hmm. I mean, Florida's just an incredible team. I think they're third right now. And my worry going into this one was Walter Clayton Jr. He didn't even have a great game by his standards, but when you have a team as deep as Florida do, it's going to be kind of hard to shut them out. Denzel Aberdeen and Thomas Hall both had 20+. So even with the Gamecocks being able to stop that primary ball handler and ball scorer and Clayton, it just didn't really go their way that day. I mean, and it was a down game by Colin Murray-Boyles' standards just because, I mean, he is the guy for this team, and he's been having to do so much on both ends of the floor. So I think it's expected after a tough stretch in the SEC that maybe his production's not as high as it was. But, I mean, if you're counting, Austin, that means 13 in a row. If you're a recent Gamecock fan and just started following in 2025, that means you haven't seen our men's basketball team win a game. Mm-hmm. So yeah, last one was in late December against Presbyterian. So,
oh, that really hurts to hear. And it doesn't get better with last night's game against LSU. It fell over very quickly in that first half. I mean, they immediately got outplayed and went down about 10 to 15 points, where they stayed most of the game. 3-10 LSU. We thought that was going to be a good opportunity for the Gamecocks to finally get that first conference win. But then they turned the ball over 18 times, and that's kind of the stat that is highlighted in my eyes. Statistically, overall, on paper, it doesn't look like a terrible game from us. Just couldn't erase that 15-point deficit.
Yeah, no, I mean, LSU, second worst team in the SEC, the worst possible team in the SEC that we can play since we are the worst. Yeah, I mean, I had high hopes going into this one. It looked like our best shot. With the rest of the schedule. I mean, we still have to play Missouri, who's 15, and Tennessee, who's 6. So we really thought this one might be the one that we would be able to take away. I mean, Jamari Thomas had an amazing game, 23 points. But, I mean, you need more than just one guy helping out Murray-Boyles when you're going to win a game. Morris Ugasuk and Zachary Davis were running cardio out there. They combined for 0 points and saw significant minutes. So, you know, it's finally some help for Colin Murray-Boyles, but, I mean, it's unfortunate that maybe that help is not always going to help them see success. But, I mean, LSU didn't shoot particularly well. I think we had better splits than them. They just shot and made more threes than we did. So we even out-rebounded LSU on both sides of the ball, which you would expect to make the game a little bit more close. But, I mean, you know, it was a great night or a great weekend, I should say, for the Hero family. Austin Hero got an assist while his big bro was getting his first All-Star appearance in the NBA, winning the three-point contest as well. So that was a cool storyline, at least from the loss. But I mean, 13 in a row, not doesn't have a good ring to it.
Nope,
not really.
Not at all. Traveling over to the other side of the court, Gamecock women's basketball rebounded from their loss to Texas with a 101-63 win over Florida last Thursday. The Gamecocks took control early with 36 points in the first quarter, tying with the second most points in a quarter in program history. They managed to rack up 62 points by the end of the first half, their best in a single half this season.
It was an all-around effort for South Carolina, with 11 of the 12 players taking the floor, scoring at least 5 points. The most notable performance comes from freshman Joyce Edwards, who scored a career-high 28 points, the most from a Gamecock this season. Other standouts versus Florida include Tahina Paopao with 7 assists and 14 points, 11 of those points coming in just 6 minutes on the floor. And Malaysia Fulwiley clocked her 15th game this season with double digits with 13 points and a season-high 5 steals.
Following the blowout win, the Gamecocks returned to Colonial Life Arena last Sunday for a highly anticipated matchup against number 7 UConn. Despite winning the past 4 contests versus the Huskies, the Gamecocks suffered their first loss at home since December of 2020.
UConn set the tone early, pulling away by 22 points at the half. The Huskies kept their foot on the gas for the remainder of the game, putting up 42 points in the second half to secure the 87-58 victory. UConn's AZ Fudd controlled the court with a whopping 28 points and 4 threes in the third to shut down the Gamecocks. Talk Florida first.
One good, one bad, but let's go ahead and talk about the good first. Florida, I didn't have much to say. I mean, they jumped on them early. That's exactly what kind of we don't see very often from this women's team.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of start out a little bit slower usually. They were all over Florida immediately, and that was pretty refreshing to see. No matter how good or bad Florida is, I'm just glad they didn't overlook them.
No, it was an incredible game. I was there courtside with SGTV, so it was a very fun one to watch. I mean, Florida had their work cut out for them even before the game, but I mean, Joyce Edwards, 28 points off the bench, I might add. I mean, the Gamecocks just had an incredible first quarter. That first quarter was their highest scoring quarter of the season. The first half was their highest scoring half of the season. In the second half, there were a couple shooting struggles, 0 for 13 from 3 and 13 from 35 on the field. So, but I mean, starting fast like that, I think they even had 6 steals in the first quarter, which helped a lot. But yeah, I mean, Joyce Edwards, 28 points. She's the first freshman to ever score 28 points in an SEC game, which was very cool to see. She's having an incredible season, leading the Gamecocks in points per game. But Paopao and Fulwiley also having amazing games. Paopao shot 100% from the field in the first quarter, in which she had 11. So that's incredible. She had another 3 later on in the third. But 14.7 rebounds, 7 assists. That's pretty close to a triple-double for Paopao. So that's really amazing. Fulwiley had an amazing game as well. 5 steals. That's crazy. 5 steals is just crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say about that. But yeah, I mean, their quick start really helped them because they were struggling in the second half. But I mean, an incredible win, highest scoring game of the season. It was a great way to bounce back from Texas. But as we will talk about now,
quite the opposite.
Yeah, right after that. So
it was a little ugly. They got exposed down low in the paint and under the basket again. Dawn Staley just has to figure out how to stop it in game. Her in-game adjustments have been a little, not rough, but they've definitely been getting beat. They've been getting outcoached a couple times. A couple years ago in the Final Four, we saw it against Iowa, where she just couldn't make those in-game adjustments, and they got bounced a game before the championship, and it's kind of happening this season again with UCLA, UConn, and then Texas as well. UConn out-rebounded us 15-6 on offense and 33-23 on defense, 48-29 overall. That's crazy, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute. That is just an insane stat. You can't win games getting outshot by or out-rebounded 19 times. Shot bad from the field again, 37.7% from the field, and then 17.6% from 3. Whenever we can't get anything working inside, I feel like we just start to throw things up from beyond the arc and live and die by the 3. And so far, we've only been dying recently, so it's not been too hot from beyond the arc, and our shooting percentage just keeps going down against these bigger and better teams.
Well, you mentioned it, Austin. The rebounds is the one thing that I had for stats-wise. I mean, obviously I mean, standout performances from AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong. But, I mean, rebounding comes with that problem that we've seen in the losses this season with the bigger presence, the more physical presences down low for these teams that the Gamecocks are playing. I mean, AZ Fudd, not necessarily a forward, but still a pretty physical guard. 28 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, just shot lights out from 3. But also Sarah Strong, they're big. 16 points, 13 rebound, double-double. I mean, that kills in the box score. I mean, we could talk about box score all day, but what I really noticed, I was there with my family this weekend. It's just stuff that wouldn't show up on the box score. It was a poor defensive effort, not really closing out people. There were some switches that were not great. They were a little slow in switches, as well as offense was even sloppy at times. Passes were going out of bounds. And it just was poor by their standards. And on a huge stage, College Game Day, of course, being here and it being on national TV, it's a really rough one, especially against UConn, who they've had a lot of success against in recent years. But going back to the rebounds, to let KK Arnold and Ashlyn Shade, who are 5'9" and 5'10", grab 3 offensive boards each. It's just something they've been struggling down low on both sides, just grabbing rebounds and also, just stopping bigs in general. And we don't even see a lot of minutes from the taller players on the team, like Sanaya Fagan, who started this game but came out just a few minutes into the game with, I think it was an eye injury or something was in her eye or something. It's really leaving Chloe Kitts to be that physical presence, or to try to be that physical presence. It's not really her forte. So it was just, I will say embarrassing, but it's just, it felt like a perfect storm between the matchups down low, and also just a lot of added pressure from College Game Day being there, maybe, is what it is. But just a difficult one, obviously. And Paige Beckers didn't even have a great game for her standards. They really allowed her to just kind of be a playmaker and not really a scorer. Obviously, she opened the game with a 3, but just finding all of the players that she needed to.
She's the best player in the country right now.
Yeah,
I think we can both agree
obviously. And just even when we do try to make those in-game adjustments, like you were mentioning, if we double a big down low, they're just going to kick it out. And Shade had a great game, shot, I think, at least 75% from 3. And just the whole team in general shot really well from behind the arc, and that's what killed us, because once that deficit happened, we were just chucking shots up. And even if we did go on a run, a 3 of UConn's would just kill all that momentum and completely silence CLA. So very difficult game, a tough watch at times too.
Yeah, Colonial Life is usually like the 6th man, where they can get really loud, they get Sandstorm cranked up. It just didn't feel that way on Sunday. It was at the beginning, but then Paige Beckers came out and hit that 3 like you mentioned, and then UConn just kind of started on a really hot streak, and we just couldn't stay in it. We couldn't stay neck and neck with them. We were just in their tail dust the entire time. So when you take the crowd and the energy out, it's going to kill all momentum.
Yeah. Coming up after the break, Austin and I will join this week's guest for a trip around the Horseshoe. Stay with us.
Coming up on Around the Horseshoe. Big news regarding playoff expansion could result in more conference games for SEC football. Is this the right move, and how will this affect SC? Women's basketball has fallen at home for the first time since 2020. How should the fan base react to the recent losses by Staley and company? And softball is off to a big start after 2 home tournaments. Our panel's updated thoughts on Carolina softball coming up. Thanks for tuning in to Gamecock Game Day, and welcome back to another week of Around the Horseshoe. Let's introduce our panel this week. As always, we have Zander Collins and Austin McConnell. They're joined this week by a very special guest, ladies and gents, Ball Don't Lie's very own Spencer Ball. Welcome, Spencer.
Thanks, guys. Very glad to be here. You know, we just did this. I was been watching at home the last couple episodes, trying to make it work, and I just finished up my exam so quickly I could hustle over here. So that's just the sacrifices I make.
So you've seen how smart Calvin and Dakota have been previously on this show. So you've got
big
some big shoes to fill.
That's right.
I guess we're gonna find out if Ball does lie.
No, I can go ahead and tell you now, but I'll let my notebook talk.
And our two shows have taken some shots back and forth at each other this semester, but it is truly an honor to have you on the show, and I guess this is a chance to, really prove maybe which show is better.
Oh, I don't know. There's no need to compare. But
it's all good fun.
It's not going to happen.
It is all in good fun.
It's all love.
We're all friends here, and that's what's most important. We're an SGTV community more than anything.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Whatever gets the views.
There you go.
For sure. All right, let's not stall any further and go around the horseshoe. Starting this week with big changes in the world of college football. Last year, commissioners and executives of all of college football's FBS conferences handed the keys of the college football playoff to the SEC and Big Ten. This came after the two conferences threatened to leave the current format if they weren't given a majority of control and revenue from the CFP. Now, meetings are beginning to occur between the Big Ten and SEC leadership to discuss the future of the postseason format. Meetings supposedly occurred today between the two conferences, with the main agenda item being playoff expansion. According to Yahoo News, a chance in expanding the playoff format will likely lead to SEC administrators paving the way towards expanding their schedule from 8 to 9 conference games. This move would result in big changes across the college football landscape and, more directly, here in Columbia. With that, how will this expansion affect the current trajectory of Carolina football? Is this expansion of both the playoff and the SEC schedule a help or a hindrance to SC? Spencer, as our guest this week, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I really don't like this. Let me just start there. I think it's kind of horrible to just put the entire sports fate in the hands of two conferences, because they aren't the only two conferences. And, you know, we've seen some of the most fun stories, I think, from just fans of the game, like Arizona State in the college football playoff, Notre Dame, an independent school, making a run to the title game. You don't have to play in the Big Ten or the SEC to, you know, make a run in this college football playoff. And frankly, I think, you know, there's probably going to be talks of auto bids and expansion so that more SEC and Big Ten teams get in. And frankly, I don't think that's good for the sport. I think it's pretty greedy. And really, if you're that good, just win enough games to get in. That's, you know, you can say that South Carolina, you know, they were on the cusp of making it this year. And frankly, you know, the LSU game, there was some questionable officiating and things like that. They still had a chance to go and beat Alabama and be a 10-win team to get in the college football playoff. At the end of the day, if you want to make the college football playoff, you just have to win games. And it doesn't matter how many conference games you play, doesn't matter, or it shouldn't matter how many auto bids there are and stuff like that, because frankly, you don't have to play in the SEC or the Big Ten to be a great football team. How this affects South Carolina, I mean, if they move to 9 conference games, again, that's going to be likely another quality opponent that will go on their schedule. But I think, so that could work good or bad. You know, I mean, that's just how the SEC is. Again, the SEC is a good conference. I don't think anyone's debating that. So is the Big Ten, but also so are the Big 12 and, I'm forgetting the other one. The ACC. No, the ACC. They weren't as, I would say they're probably the weakest this year. But again, it's not so much about that. I just don't like the process of giving these teams auto bids. But for South Carolina, I mean, it's really what they would make of it. You know, 9 SEC games would give you a chance to possibly beat 9 SEC teams. And I tell you what, the committee would love that.
Yeah.
That would probably turn into an auto bid no matter, you know, what kind of format it is. So I think it could work out for the Gamecocks. But one thing I don't like is I feel like right now with the newness of conference realignment, for example, Texas, their SEC schedule was cupcake compared to majority of other teams. So you have to make it balanced. However you want to play it or make the schedules, you have to make them play an even amount of good teams, which is hard to make it's hard to predict at the beginning of the season. But Texas's best SEC opponent was Texas A&M, who turned out to be an 8-4 team, but they didn't even get to play the cream of the crop of the SEC. So they did play Georgia as well. But, you know, outside of that, which they lost, I meant their wins was, you know, few and far between. So I think it's just about finding a good balance. But I don't really like the direction of this in general for where it's headed for the sports. So
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little messy. I feel like they need to, you know, get some more regulations on it. I don't think whether the SEC and Big Ten are in control or not, I don't think the college football playoff should expand anymore. I actually think it should go down to 8 teams, I think. And then you get rid of maybe conference championship games. I don't like the auto bid ideal.
Yeah, it's confusing for sure.
It's just confusing, and this whole bracket was really cool for like once, maybe next year as well. But I don't know. I don't know if I could get behind that for years to come. So I would go like 8 teams, and then the best of the best play each other no matter what conference. Because I agree with you, Arizona State, Notre Dame, they were all in it. You know, we don't like Clemson, but they were the 5 seed, and they put up a decent fight against Texas. They were the best first-round matchup. So I don't know. I think you could get 8 really solid teams, and a couple of those coming from the Big Ten and SEC as well. But going to the Gamecocks, I would say it just depends. You mentioned it. It's so hard to predict at the beginning of the year, like how good everyone's going to be. You could schedule either Texas or Kentucky. Texas was top 5 team all year, and Kentucky, we beat the brakes off of them. So it's like it doesn't.
But Kentucky, you know, at the beginning of the year, they were like, well, they might be a dark horse to win 8 games, and they were awful.
They
so
were not,
you know,
so.
it is a hard job. But
Yeah, it's just hard to predict that, which is exactly what I agree with you on. So I don't know. I'm kind of back and forth with it. I've been wrestling with it all day today. I would say South Carolina, I think it would benefit them just because where they've been at the last few years, like back in like the early 2010s when they were beating Michigan, they were beating all the cream of the crop teams like you were mentioning. They were exciting to watch, and they were a top 10 team. Now it's like they've had the rocky years, but now they've got a talented roster. So it depends how their year goes. They could go 10-3 and beat Texas and Bama along the way, and then also whoop up on Vandy and Kentucky. It depends. Like, I don't know. I'm still torn. I still have no idea.
It also depends on how the committee respects strength of schedule, because South Carolina has Virginia Tech to open the year next year. If they lose that game and again are on the brink of making the college football playoff, let's say they don't make it, will they schedule those tough out-of-conference games, or will a 9th SEC game? Then now we're playing 10 teams that are probably top 50 in the country, let's say.
Right.
And, you know, if you go 9-3, might not be good enough. We saw it this year, it wasn't. So it's do you even take the risk of that? So it's kind of hit or miss. I think from fans, you want to go see your team play good teams.
Yeah.
Like, I hate going to Willie B and watching them beat Wofford by 50. I'm like, no, I would leave at halftime too. Like, it's not a fun watch. I get it. You have a couple tune-ups, but watching Alabama play Mercer and Kennesaw State, you know, 3 or 4 games of the year, it's like, you know, no wonder they're 10-2 come the end of the year.
I think that's something the college football committee would have to come out and like express. Like, how are they looking at their rankings? Because we saw Alabama, they were ranked ahead of us. Obviously, we lost to Alabama, but they got crushed by Oklahoma, a team that we crushed. So it's like, it depends on resume, obviously, but it's how they look at each other's resume. Are they more focused on the head-to-heads? Are they focused on the strength of schedule? Their out-of-conference games? Like, I'm not sure what they were looking for last year. I think a lot of people were very confused as well. And obviously, we were very involved in it because we were 13th, I think, in the final polls right before it came out.
Right outside,
Yeah, so I would just want the college football playoff to explain kind of what they're looking for.
Well, I looked at it a bit more positively. Just if things do go perfectly, you think about it, it's more challenging games for South Carolina, but it's more challenging games for those teams that are going for the auto bid. Like Texas, I know you said they didn't have a really strong schedule this year, but Georgia, Alabama, those teams that will take one game like Kennesaw State or Mercer off their schedule and have to make them, you know, play tougher opponents.
That's very true.
I think also, like you said, strength of schedule is super important when you're campaigning to go to the playoffs. Like, if you aren't able to get that auto bid, we've seen, like we saw, multiple teams from the SEC made the playoffs, even with the auto bid. So I think for South Carolina, if you look at it optimistically, I think you could say, like, yeah, it's an opportunity to beat one more team. Also, from a fan's perspective, why wouldn't you want the highest quality product? Like you said, leaving at halftime against Wofford, like, you know, stuff like that. Also, even for the conference, I mean, while it might be bad to like politicize the sport even more and give these conferences power like that, I think it's also great for them because obviously they're going to be making a ton of money off of an extra game with broadcasting rights and everything. So
the sad part is I feel like that's the only thing that the people making the decisions care about, because that's the whole reason the Pac-12 died. And that was arguably like the most fun conference.
That's football heritage.
After dark was awesome.
Exactly. You know, fire up the TV at 10 o'clock. You've got a game
Stay up
that
till 2 a.m.
ends in a total score of like, you know, 55 to 52. And you're like, this is the coolest thing ever. And they just shot it.
Yeah, and there was a big debate on social media last year, and sorry not to cut you off, Zander, but the Big Ten versus the SEC. It was like all the Big Ten, like the Ohio State fans, Penn State fans, they were all like, why do they play Wofford or Mercer in the middle of November, right before rivalry week? So I think and I agree. I don't want to play Wofford the week before we play Clemson. Like, that's just not going to fire me up enough.
It makes sense. You want to, like, rest your guys, get a tune-up week.
Right.
But it's like, it's not fun.
But
It's
I'd
not fun to
rather
watch, that's
play
for sure.
Texas. I'd rather welcome a Kentucky, which has become a rivalry over the last decade or so. So, I don't know. I agree with everything y'all are saying. I would get rid of that November game, maybe.
Yeah, well, that's another thing I have down because, I mean, if you do take out that November game, it becomes a late season SEC game that's a must win if you're trying to get into the playoffs. But just to kind of summarize, I think for South Carolina, it's great. I mean, you really have to make the most out of it, though. It's an opportunity to strengthen your schedule and have other teams around you fall because anybody can beat anybody in the SEC, especially last season. Vanderbilt, who would have thought? But yeah, also just if you're a neutral fan, maybe you're not the biggest fan of it. Like if you're a fan of a Big 12 school or an ACC school, just because it'll take a spot from you. But we've seen with the auto bids how it takes spots from teams like that anyway. So I think that, I mean, right now I'm a fan. I guess I'll have to see how it plays out, how these meetings go. But I think it's good.
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely a lot of talk about strength of schedule, and especially after this previous playoff, that was the big talking point, was strength of schedule needs to matter. And I think if the SEC really wants to go to this 9th game, and I think this is kind of the direction that them and the Big Ten are pushing for, if they want to go to this 9th game, then for the playoff, strength of schedule has to matter a lot more than it did in the previous year. So I think that's what a lot of these meetings are kind of heading towards. And the talks of all of the auto bids, with what we've heard in the news so far, the consensus is that the SEC and the Big 12 are both pushing for 4 auto bids each in a 14 or 16 team playoff. So that would mean half of the playoff would be run by these two conferences, which have heralded themselves to be the top conferences in the nation. Whether or not that's true, I mean, there's a bunch of different
I'd love to see that
qualities.
happen, and then like your 16 seed goes in there and just mobs.
Yeah,
the floor.
exactly. Like
SMU,
there's a bunch.
That would
It
make
goes on a
me-
magical
even
run.
you know what? Not to say like, of course I'd be pulling for South Carolina, but if they happen to fall to the sword, that's a win for college football fans because I don't know. It's so frustrating that like the two conferences, they want to add another conference game just so they can dominate the playoff and get as many teams that they can in, and it's just like. That's not what the sport's about, and that's what they're losing.
I just want to see Iowa State get go 10-2 and have a solid year in the Big 12 and finish runner-up in the Big 12 championship, and then get left out for like a 10-4, like not mediocre because it's really impressive to go 10-4 in the SEC, but or 10-4 overall with a bunch of SEC wins. But I don't know. I don't want other teams to fall victim and.
No, well,
I don't want it to become SEC versus Big Ten, and that's all of college football.
It's the danger of heralding yourself as the top 2 conferences because there's so many different qualities that you have to consider that taking these other conferences and shoving them to the side because, their opponent's not good or their conference as a whole doesn't have as much perceived depth as something as the SEC or Big Ten. So that's why I think these auto bids are really, something that are an issue. And Spencer, you pointed on that most so I'm going to give you the 2 points for this topic.
Thanks, Ryan.
And looking over my notes, Austin, mentioning strength of schedule needs to matter, but Zander saying that these new games present a challenge both for SC and for other teams. I am going to go with Austin on this one just because strength of schedule was
Made my eyes
the
light
hot
up.
topic. It was the topic for the playoffs last year. It was, for all of these teams who were out, you look at the Miamis, the Alabamas, Ole Miss, us included in that, it was, why are we falling to some of these other teams who barely scraped in when our strength of schedule is leagues above them? And you could say that about any of the top 4 teams that got left out, really, in comparison to, SMU, where we saw how that played out in the first round. So Spencer's going to get 2, Austin's going to get 1. We'll move on to our next topic here. Panic. That seems to be the general feeling regarding Carolina women's basketball at the moment. This weekend, Carolina hosted the 6th-ranked UConn Huskies, as well as ESPN's College Gameday, but they did not have the result they wanted. Their 87-58 loss was not only a blowout for the Gamecocks, but also their first home loss in 71 straight home games. This is Carolina's third loss of their season, their most since the 2020-21 season, where they finished with 5 total losses. Despite those losses, they were still listed as a 1 seed in that year's tournament and went to the Final Four, where they fell to Stanford by 1 point. However, this is a far different game than it was in 2021. The Gamecocks are now ranked 6th in the nation, below Notre Dame, Texas, UCLA, USC, and the aforementioned UConn. Of those teams, only UConn has 3 losses, and there are plenty of 2-loss teams looking to leapfrog the Gamecocks should they fall again. So, how warranted is this panic? Are Staley and the Gamecocks still in a good spot, or should there be some worry? Austin, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Ryan. We are so spoiled to have this good of a women's basketball team to the point where we are panicking over our 3rd loss. Like, 3 losses in a basketball season is honestly not much at all. But we've had that 71 game home win streak.
Didn't lose at all last year.
Yeah, didn't lose at all. Went to the Natty. It was awesome. But I wouldn't panic. I wouldn't panic at all. I would maybe start to worry, but not to the point where you're freaking out about, we're gonna get bounced in the first round, like we're gonna go lose to Sacramento State or something like that. Like, that's not gonna happen. We talked about it earlier in our first segment. We don't have Cardoso anymore. We don't have a huge, big threat down low. We can beat most teams, but the best of the best, like UConn and UCLA, they have shown that they can expose us. And the teams that we play in the tournament are going to look at that tape. I mean, Texas as well. Like, they found our loophole. They found our weak spot. So I wouldn't panic yet. I don't think panic's the right word to use for women's basketball. I would just figure out a different way to start winning some bigger games.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable, like you said, to be a little worried. It's definitely a bit much to panic, for sure, because, again, it's only your 3rd loss. Your only losses are to ranked teams, and really, like, top-tier basketball teams. They're all, again, in that, like, top 5 to 10 range. So, and that's one of the strengths of our women's basketball team, I think, is they're not afraid to go and schedule ranked teams, which makes me, it makes me very happy, because if you looked at LSU heading into South Carolina's LSU matchup, they had 2 ranked wins, and we'd already beaten 5 or 6 ranked teams and lost to UCLA.
Couple
and
that's 40,
Yeah.
That's like 7 or 8 ranked opportunities. So I think you're putting yourselves in a good place by even playing high-level tournament opposition, because by the time March rolls around, you're at least, you might have already seen a team once. If they're SEC, maybe twice, and I think that puts you in a good spot come the tournament time. And I think they're still going to be okay, but I also think this is the first time in a while where you can look at our women's basketball team and say, they might not be the best in the country.
Yeah.
Last year, it was, like, very obvious. You watched it and you were like,
Yeah.
we should win the title. Like, we are just beating everybody by a handful.
Don Staley can also use this time to figure out how to stop these teams from finding their Achilles heel. Like, they can, when they play these bigger opponents, their weaknesses are exposed early. Okay, so now how do you pivot? How do you figure out a way to game plan before so you don't go down 20 early on in the first or second quarter? So I think what you said is really important about playing these big ranked matchups early in the season.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I've noticed about Gamecock women's basketball, this happened like all 4 years I've been here, is they do tend to start slow. The first quarter is often not very good, and for UConn, it just seemed to get out of hand quick because they really shot the ball really well, especially from outside. And you guys mentioned it earlier where down on the low block, there was a big problem. We didn't really have much of an answer for Sarah Strong, but it was that supporting cast that were getting open when we tried to double in the paint, easy 3-pointers, and that can't happen. And one of the big keys I think this team is missing is Ashlyn Watkins, of course, out for the year. But she's been, even with Camila Cardoso last year, I would argue that Watkins is even more physical. Like, you just watch her plays really tenacious, gets after the ball. It's really a tough, if you're attacking her in the post, it's really tough to score on her, averaging more than a block. I'd maybe argue even 2 a game. I don't remember off the top of my head. But that's a huge loss to lose for the entire season. So I don't think the panic is warranted. This team might not win the title, and that's okay because you're still a great team. You're a young team. You've got a lot of talent that'll be back. Of course, you're going to have a really good recruiting class. It's what South Carolina women's basketball does. I wouldn't count them out, but again, I wouldn't also lock them to win the tournament this year. And again, that's okay. We've been very spoiled. They've been to the Final Four 4 straight years. It wouldn't surprise me if they go again. I just think that's where you're going to see if they can get it done against some of the teams they've lost to. If not, I think it's okay because I think, again, this team, it is a dynasty. You know, you can rebuild and come back next year. So, and that's okay.
That point that you just made, where you're not necessarily picking them to be the champion right now, is why I'm a little bit concerned. Obviously, I'm not panicking. This team is very talented, but I am concerned. Excuse me.
I am panicking
because we mentioned it in the first segment. I mean, there are a lot of consistencies in the games that we are losing, and like you said, they have that tape to go look at.
Yeah.
We can't handle the bigs down low, and we try to stop them. They kick it out to the corner, and UConn shot very well doing that.
Yeah.
Just like that. I think that it's been a pretty bad week for their standards in general, and with what we've come to expect, I think that we are expecting championships out of a dynasty team, and for three of their streaks to be broken in the span of a week, their SEC win streak, their home win streak, their win streak against UConn, who, if you are trying to become that next college basketball dynasty, that's who you have to dethrone. UConn basketball for the past 20 years, 20, 30, have been the women's college basketball program. So I think that's a little bit disheartening, obviously, but also just going back to the bigs, I can't state it enough. Like, if we can't get someone to stop them, and we aren't playing the bigger players like the centers and stuff, I just don't see how that helps us in any of these games. And my concern doesn't mean we go out in the Sweet 16 or something. Obviously, we're going to be getting to the Final Four, most likely, but that's when we have to kind of change those game plans, because the best teams in the country have the best bigs. That's how it works in women's college basketball.
That's why South Carolina's been so successful.
Yeah.
You look at their Aaliyah Boston, Camila Cardoso, Asia Wilson before them.
Yeah.
And makes a lot of sense.
That's sort of the pipeline for the sport in general, and it concerns me that the player who's getting the most minutes in that position is Chloe Kitts, she is tall, but she's not the most physical of players. We saw that just the whole season in general when she's giving up offensive rebounds to the other teams, and that's what made the deficit so large in the UConn game. So I don't think it's one of those ones where we just say, oh, they needed this kind of loss to build on the future. We can't keep saying that about every loss. It's at a certain point, we got to be back to the Staley standard of being the best team in the country, winning every game by double digits. And I think that obviously the Texas one probably played a bit of a part. They played those games very close together, but I mean, with 10 McDonald's All-Americans, you can't be losing 3 games in the season. That's just, on paper, you should be winning every game by how many we lost to UConn by. Yeah. So I'm not panicked, but I am concerned, because as we get later in the season, those matchups against the bigs will be very prevalent, and people will have a lot a time to study that film.
I like the Staley standard. That's good.
Alliteration.
I coined that. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. I think, you touched on this, Zander. The issue is having a team that Dawn Staley maybe isn't necessarily as used to in comparison with some of her teams in the past. I mean, you think about Carolina basketball the last, several years where Dawn Staley has had the success. It's big play and a lot of, very aggressive, high-quality defense. And we don't have the players. We have great talent. We have incredibly talented players. As you mentioned, 10 McDonald's All-Americans. It's insane to have on any roster, and on paper we should, be figuring something out to where we're not losing 3 games. But when you're playing these quality opponents every week, not just in the SEC, but in these non-conference schedules, and you have to adjust to something that you're not quite as used to, it can take some time. And it kind of seems like, Dawn Staley's obviously an amazing basketball coach, but she's still trying to figure that out. Her and her team of coaches and the team themselves are still really trying to figure out how to pivot into this new identity. And they've had some success with it. There were obviously the stretch after the UCLA game where we faced a lot of highly ranked opponents and did very well between them. But then you mentioned that Ashlyn Watkins injury comes in and you're losing the big talent. So you kind of have to pivot more so off of that Watkins injury, and that becomes a whole other thing that we're seeing now with some of these really top teams who do have their identity figured out. I feel like that's why we're struggling more so against those teams. So with that, 2 points going to Zander for this one, with the mention of, the identity and just the consistency of seeing these are the issues, because the teams we've lost to the way they have played us, it's because of the big play and our lack of quality control on defense. To where, Dawn Staley mentioned it in her press conference after the UConn game. If you mess up against UConn, they're going to go down the court and shoot a three. And that's exactly what they did all game, and that's why it turned into, such a big blowout for the Gamecocks. Spencer, I'm going to give you the one on this one. I just think, you mentioned Dawn Staley wants to play these big teams, as she mentions in all of her press conference. These games are huge for advancing the sport of women's college basketball. And she just has to recover. She just has to kind of figure out that identity, look at the tape, look at how moving forward into the postseason, you're probably going to be facing at least one of these teams again, likely multiple, maybe, depending on how the seeding goes. But you really have to recover from that, and that's something that I think Staley and the team as a whole needs to look a little bit more into, needs to work on. So 2 points for Zander, 1 for Spencer, and we'll move on to our final topic. Let's take a look over at Beckham Field. Carolina softball has started off very strong with a 10-0 start to their softball season. SC has hosted 2 home tournaments since the start of the season, with the Gamecock Invitational and Carolina Classic. They have dominated in these tournaments with 6 total run rule victories and 2 walk-off wins over Virginia, a team who received votes to be ranked in the preseason according to several polls. That success has been rewarded for Carolina as they debuted at number 24 on the D1softball.com rankings this week, as well as other listings on the 3 remaining major polls. Now, Carolina has a lot of work ahead of them still. They have another home tournament this week, one featuring the previously ranked Boston University Terriers, as well as their first road series against Duke next week. Duke, of course, being the team who knocked them out of the postseason last year, and that's not even touching on the tough SEC schedule still ahead, with opponents like Oklahoma, LSU, and Arkansas on the docket early. So, is this big start a sign of good things to come, or is it still too early to set expectations for this team? Zander, your thoughts?
Well, you, Brian, weren't necessarily a fan of my expectations going into this season, but I mean, I have a lot of faith in Chastain Woodard. I said that I trust her experience as a pitching coach, as a coach in general, and she had her pick of the lot of all the players she wanted to transfer in, and those players are playing well. I think that, I mean, obviously you guys didn't have very high expectations, or well, I guess you two.
Whoa!
Well, I'm not sure how you thought about softball, but
well, I know Chastain Woodard led UNCC to one of their best seasons ever last year, so I was excited. My dad went to Charlotte, so he's tapped into all the 49er sports. So I did know a little bit about it, and he was upset. So I knew that was probably a good thing for us.
But I think starting 11-0 at this point last season, they had already lost a game, so that's already an improvement on a pretty inconsistent season last season. But I think it's a sign of things to come. Obviously, we haven't played anybody ranked just yet, or anybody from the SEC, which I know you guys value pretty highly. I mean, it's the best softball conference, but I think it can't hurt being undefeated going into those games, building confidence, especially for those new players who you said, Brian, you weren't sure would translate to the SEC. But just if we want to go off pitching, Neely Lamb and Katie Becker, 2 of those transfers that came in, are playing, and they are striking out people. So that's just something to say about Chastain Woodard's coaching, and I think my expectations are still pretty high for this team. I still think that I'll go on my hill and say we win a couple playoff series. So, yeah, I think that, I mean, my take's aging pretty good so far this season. Obviously, like I said, have no ranked teams just yet or SEC opponents, but I mean, undefeated, they've won all the games they've played. So
certainly can't complain about that. I mean, it's their longest undefeated start since 1996 when they started 12-0. So I would definitely buy in. I wouldn't shoot too high. It's year 1 of the Chastain Woodard era. But really, we'll know what this team is made of when the SEC comes around. You know, you got a big series against Duke coming up, but you've won, as Zander said, you've won all your games. That's what you have to do. You know, you gotta have a good record heading into SEC play.
You can't do anything more, you know.
You quite literally can't. And Chastain Woodard has proven to be a program builder at Charlotte, so I think so far, again, it's an early return, but she's definitely proving that she's been a really good hire. But it is going to get harder. I mean, the SEC as of right now has 13 top 25 teams, so that's more than half. It's almost like it's over 3/4 of the conference in the top 25. And I'm assuming probably the other schools are right on the cusp. So it is, a premier softball league. So we're gonna have to wait to see kind of what this Carolina team is made of in conference play. But right now they're playing really well. Just last night against UNC, they won 11-3. In the first inning, it started 3-0 in favor of the Tar Heels. They rattled off 11 straight runs, held them scoreless since the first, and had a program high 12 walks. And that's always something that's really good is plate discipline. If you can do that against SEC pitchers, have a really good vision of the zone, and just get on base. Sometimes that's all it takes, and especially with those transfer pitchers, if they're performing as well as they are right now, that's a good formula for success. And again, when you've got a leadoff like Quincy Lilio, who's hitting .640 right now, the transfer from Oklahoma, you're going to be in good position to win games when you're getting on base that high. You've got more power bats behind her driving in runs. So I think Chastain Woodard's done a great job really building this team up with a couple players who stayed behind from the Bev Smith era, but really a lot of transfers, a lot of ragtag group, some from Charlotte, some from other SEC schools all around the country. But they've really come together, and they've started the season well. So I would definitely buy into the hype. I just don't think we know quite how much of it there is going to be this season. But overall, great start.
You'd expect a team full of transfers to at least have a wake-up call at some point. I don't know.
Kind of like Arkansas men's basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's tough to bring all those new people together.
It's the same formula. Great coach, Calipari, and just a bunch of transfers. So, like we all said, you can't do much more than win. You can't do anything more than win. And with a team full of transfers to not even have slipped up once, I think that's pretty good. It dates back to what, 95, you said?
96, yeah.
96, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, get excited. I'm buying in. I'm for sure buying in. I did have those lower expectations because I didn't know how it was going to go. Like we just mentioned, it's hard to group a bunch of people together that haven't played with each other at all. I was a little skeptical at first, but I'm ready. I think Chastain Woodard has done a phenomenal job. Again, y'all said it. I don't think they're going to go win the Natty, but and they're going to get into SEC play, and it's going to get hard. But I just want to throw some stats at you. Ready? Defensively, we are 5th in the country in double plays per game, and 8th in team ERA. Offensively, we are 7th in the country in doubles per game, and 5th in on-base percentage. You talked about with the career high or the team high walks. So we are just finding ways to win games no matter how the first few innings go, and I think that's a huge factor in a winning program. And when we go play Oklahoma, when we go play Florida, when we go play all these good SEC teams, we're going to steal some from these girls, and we're going to find a way to just win some series. And if we can just stay above 500 like we did last year, we're going to find our way into the tournament, and that's where the magic happens. So you just got to get to the dance. But like you mentioned, we started a little slower last year, have had a couple losses by this point already, but I think the whole community is just really built around Chastain Woodard, and they're so glad that she came back to Columbia to coach at her alma mater. So I'm definitely buying into the hype. I think the stats are really cool. We're in the top 10 for a lot of different stats. Those are just a few examples. We are like at the top. We are competing statistically with some of the best, and we're gonna see that on-field product against Duke, against Boston, like you mentioned. So we're gonna see how it actually shapes out on field, because that's obviously more important than the statistics. But I've really liked what's going on so far.
Mentioning those statistics as well, you brought up the double plays per game. We're 5th in the country. I believe we also lead the SEC currently in double plays total. So a huge stat when you think of, this is such a high caliber conference for softball, probably the top conference in college softball, for sure. I would say, especially with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, who were 1 and 2 for pretty much all of last season, save for maybe 1 or 2 weeks. But you have the question, when you bring in so much new talent of all these different pieces, are they necessarily going to fit together the right way? And I think with the culture that Chastain and her coaching staff has built so far here at Carolina, they're absolutely fitting together. I mean, Austin, you bring up all of these statistical categories that were, top 10, top 5 in the country. It shows that this program is able to grow at a very high rate very early on. And of course, Spencer mentioning Chastain Woodard as a program builder, it's obviously nice to see some level of growth in the first season when you have a program building type of coach, when you know it's probably going to take a few years to get to the very top, especially in such a tough conference. But to see, this much improvement compared to, where this team was last year, it is very exciting. My one hiccup, though, right now is just the quality of opponents that we faced. We had Georgia State last weekend, we had Miami of Ohio, and we had App State. Those were the 3 teams we played last weekend. Georgia State was winless, and out of both Miami of Ohio and App State, I think both were either winless or had 1 win so far that season. And obviously it could be, they're maybe traveling to some of these high-profile tournaments or just facing really high-profile opponents to start their season. But, you see all of these, we should be having walk-off victories against these teams. We should, be dominating these teams. So it's not necessarily a surprise to me that we've had this result. And I think that might be my one holdup on kind of having this hype train go to the level that it is right now. But obviously, 10-0, just a fantastic start for this program, something this program has not achieved in a very, very long time. With that being said, Austin, I'm going to give you the 2 points for this. And it's because, all of these pieces coming together, and you mentioned finding ways to win games. That is crucial, especially as we start in the SEC, because you don't know day by day what you're going to get hit with. Are they going to be, really, really good pitchers, like top pitchers in the nation, or are you going to face a really batting heavy team and, going to have to rely on your offense a lot more to, keep the blows going back and forth, really. So I think their ability to kind of adjust to their situation and really play through the game, I think is really, really helpful right now. With the 1 point, however, I'm giving it to our guest this week, Mr. Spencer Ball, which means he is our champion.
Oh my God.
And you mentioned just the ability of Chastain Woodard to bring in the right pieces. She's bringing in, she has so much pitching expertise, and it's so highly touted in the SEC. Pitching experience is so vital, and her bringing in pitchers like Gress and Neely Lamb has obviously, right now played a very key role in just how this team is able to do so good. So, giving you the 1 point this week, Austin gets 2, and that means Mr. Spencer Ball is our champion this week. Congratulations, Spencer.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Of course, thanks for joining the show.
It's a great segment.
Yeah,
I gotta say, it's a lot of fun.
Well, we gotta give credit to Ryan. He's the one who brought it to us. This is obviously our 2nd season of Gamecock Gameday, and I'm loving it. I love how we get to speak to so many guests. JP Barry, you're next. You got your partner on here.
That's right.
So
You can't call people out if you haven't won yet, Austin.
Dude, I know, man.
You still winless?
Yeah.
Do you have a win?
Of course.
So you have a win.
Yeah, of course.
Don't of course over there.
You're taking points from my takes, so
Next
you
week.
take that. You
I'm
take that up
I'm
with
kidding,
your points
I'm kidding.
picker,
Obviously,
my
a
friend.
well-deserved win
1-0.
for Spencer.
Austin, if it's any consolation, you did beat Zander this week.
That's always great. That's always great.
That's a win.
A little bragging rights.
Yeah,
guess so,
that
yeah.
counts.
Yeah, but I don't think we can ever take a shot at BDL now that they're 1-0 against us. So.
Yeah, we'll think about it. At least we'll be a little bit more hesitant.
Yeah.
We'll try and get you guys on. We got to think of a fun segment. Usually we just sit here and just ramble for a while. It's pretty much how that one goes.
Yeah.
So we'll see how incorporating we can be with that style. But yeah, we'd love to get you guys on, of course.
Yeah. Well, once again, big thank you, Spencer, for joining us this week.
Thank you, guys.
We'll be back with more Gamecock Game Day right after this.
Welcome back, Gamecocks.
Here's a look at the upcoming Gamecocks basketball schedule. Gamecock women's basketball will seek redemption from last week's loss back at Colonial Life Arena tomorrow night at 7 against Arkansas. Then they will travel to Nashville on Sunday to take on the Vanderbilt Commodores at 3 p.m.
Gamecocks men's basketball will continue their search for a conference win on Saturday as they return to Colonial Life Arena to take on Texas at 8:30. They will then be back on the road as they head to Missouri to take on the number 15 Tigers next Tuesday at 9.
Women's basketball first?
Sure, let's do it.
Perfect. The women will have no issue against Arkansas. They are 2-10 in conference and 9-18 overall, and dead last in the SEC. This is a good opportunity to bounce back from what was, like Zander mentioned earlier in the show, a pretty embarrassing loss against UConn on the big stage. Definitely some nerves were there. This is going to be a good opportunity to kind of calm those nerves, calm down, just move on,
absolutely.
and just get focused for their final 4 games of the season before they go into SEC tournament play and then NCAA tournament play. So Vanderbilt will be a little more competitive as it's on the road, and Vandy's 6-6 in conference play, so a little bit harder than Arkansas, but glad Arkansas is kind of that buffer right in the middle. With only one more ranked opponent left on the regular season schedule, I don't think South Carolina has much to worry about until number 14 Kentucky on March 2nd in Colonial Life to wrap up the regular season.
Yeah, just to put it into perspective of how poor a season Arkansas is having, ESPN has given them a 1% chance to win this matchup.
Saw that this morning.
And Vanderbilt, only has a 13% chance to win.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned in the Around the Horseshoe segment, I'm not panicking about this team by any means.
Yeah.
The UConn loss was concerning. I think we really start to panic if they lose one of these ones. I think these ones are very easy for them.
Would you panic if they lose to Kentucky?
Maybe. Just because of the high standard, the Staley standard, as we're starting to use that now. But I mean, Arkansas 1 win from their last 5, and Vanderbilt only has 2 from their last 5. I know we're not much better at 3, but obviously we're playing more difficult opponents, I think, than them. So I'm not worried about these ones. I'll keep it brief. I think we sweep both of those up.
Yeah, and now our men's basketball look ahead, a little less positive.
Might be the opposite.
16-10 Texas and 19-6 Missouri are our next 2 opponents. Good opportunity for us to get one against Texas. Probably our last good opportunity.
I would say that's our best chance left.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't think we're going to get one against Missouri, in Missouri as well. Texas still has a 67% chance to beat us, and they might because they average more points per game than us by 7%. But other than points per game, we're pretty even on paper with them. So if we can do the basics and just find a way to outscore them, then we've got a shot. However, Texas did just beat Kentucky, so they're definitely feeling good. They're definitely on a high. Obviously, you know, the name of the game is to score more points than Texas. They clearly have that advantage on us right now. But we have a rebound advantage, or we're like within 1% of them. So if we can make the little things work, those all tune up to build one big W. So if we can get it against Texas, I just don't want to have a big old goose egg in the win column for the SEC play. I just want to find us one win.
Unfortunately, that's looking more and more likely. Even if Texas is our best chance to win, they still got players like Trey Johnson, who has had 24-plus points in 3 of the last 5 games, and also that includes a 32-point performance in that win against Kentucky. So they've got a star of their own, I will say. Texas 2-5 in the last 5. They're 11th in the SEC. Still by no means a bad team. But it's really difficult to pick the Gamecocks on a streak like this, because to break the streak, you have to beat a pretty competent team. Texas, very competent team, like I mentioned. The more and more I look at the schedule, the more I'm like thinking it's a real possibility we don't get a conference win, which would just be kind of funny, honestly. The parallel between, well, not even parallel because they're not very similar at all, between the men's team and the women's team. It's just, it's crazy, honestly.
I'm glad you find it funny because I'm tired of yelling at my TV. We mentioned it earlier.
Funny as in like odd.
Yeah.
I'll say.
Like how did this happen?
Yeah.
Right? Like especially after the year we had last year. Mentioned it earlier. I thought LSU was our best chance. I could very well see them coming out flat. It's really hard to get fired up for a game when you've lost 13 in a row. And your season's pretty much all but wrapped up. It's tough. It's tough to get fired up. I've been on teams in the past where we weren't good at all. We were also in the same boat. We were 0-12, and it was hard to get up for a midweek game on a Wednesday night.
Because you don't have the expectations of a win.
You don't, and it's really, what do you even say in the locker room? Like,
go get them.
We're going to get them, guys. Let's get fired up, and then we lose by 20. So it's really unfortunate. It's hard as Lamont Paris, because I don't think he's done a bad job. We've been in those games, especially against really good opponents. They couldn't find the way to get the couple wins. We're asking for a miracle down the stretch, and definitely a miracle in the SEC tournament, but that's going to be early.
Well, something we'll hear in the locker room is go get those Tigers, not go get Tiger, because then we've got Missouri right after. 15th ranked team in the country. They're 3-5 in their last 5. I mean, I don't expect much from the Gamecocks in this one. The most interesting storyline that I have down is that we'll get to play Josh Gray, former Gamecock. So
yeah, that'll be a good return.
I mean, unfortunately, I think it'll be a blowout for Missouri, just because they have 3 guards that average double digits. It's kind of like the same recipe of a team that Kentucky had, and they dealt with us pretty well. Mark Mitchell, of course, spent time at Duke, so he's had some of the greatest coaches in the game around him. So, and then Tamar Bates, who's leading their team in points, and Caleb Grill. So that triple-headed guard attack is very scary. I don't have high expectations for this one. How about you?
I definitely don't. I'm done. It has been such a long season for basketball. I mean, I had such high expectations because of last season, and I know we lost a lot of guys, including Josh Gray, like you just mentioned. It'll be fun, odd to play.
Yeah,
against them.
welcome back.
Yeah,
Josh Gray.
welcome back. We'll see.
Or
We'll see
I
how
guess we're
rowdy
going there,
CLA
aren't we?
gets. Yeah, it's in Missouri. Oh, dang it, that sucks. Well,
Yeah.
it's in Columbia, so but like it's. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't have much hope. Women's basketball, obviously, we have a lot to talk about because they have so many bigger games coming up. This is kind of we're just trying to get to the end so we can focus on off-season training.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up our show for tonight. Thanks for tuning in to Gamecock Game Day.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, and YouTube at SGTV at USC. To keep up with all of our content, be sure to also visit us online at SGTV at USC.com. I'm Austin McConnell.
And I'm Zander Collins. From all of us here at SGTV, have a great night, Carolina. Forever 2D.